one of the things that I know you are interested in right now, I think is especially relevant for what's going on in early 2026, is future of work topics. So can you tell me about where your interest of the future of work is going? Because that term has meant many different things. Because like the future is an ambiguous term, right? And work obviously is changing all the time. In the past, it just meant return to work or something like that. But what does the future of work mean for you right now, and why are you focusing on it?
It's a great question, and thank you first for having me on your show. Workforce transformation is highly focused on human and executive development. I
Yeah.
think there's a real critical need for really driving new skills in the workplace, not driving new skills for executives and particularly leaders. And I think we're seeing that at the forefront. What does this new skill set look like? What do we need in order to survive and prosper in the future of work?
Yeah. Amy, are you falling in love with the European perspective on these things? Where's your heart at this moment when it comes to this work? Well, dig into those events and the councils, and explain what the conference board is too, just for people who may not be initiated. What is the conference board, and what are these events, and what are the councils, and kind of what is the impetus behind them?
Great. The Conference Board is a nonprofit think tank.
Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper. Today's guest is Amy Armitage, Program Director for Human Capital Analytics and Strategic Workforce Planning at the Conference Board. Hey, Directionally Correct fans, this podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively bring workforce intelligence and AI into the workplace. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, watch videos on Spotify or YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. If you're looking to build up your skills this year, sign up for the Data-Driven HR Academy at datadrivenhracademy.com, where you'll learn key concepts from Cole's book, People Analytics. And if you're looking to hear from Cole directly, reach out to him at colenapper.com. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. All right, Amy. I've been following you for quite some time. I think the world of you in a variety of capacities, which we'll get into. But one of the things that I know you are interested in right now, I think is especially relevant for what's going on in early 2026, is future of work topics.
Yes.
So can you tell me about where your interest of the future of work is going? Because that term has meant many different things. Because like the future is an ambiguous term, right? And work obviously is changing all the time. In the past, it just meant return to work or something like that. But what does the future of work mean for you right now, and why are you focusing on it?
It's a great question, and thank you first for having me on your show. I've been, honored to be a friend of yours, a colleague for many years now. The future of work is really about four things for me right now. It's about the role of technology and how that's changing and shaping business strategy. The change in digital economies is particularly important. It's also about transparency because technology is really driving new levels of transparency in business. It's about trust. And then I'd add another one, which is teams, the new role of teams in driving business value. So that's really what the future of work is about for me. I'm doing it through communities, through my two councils, but also I've done it through some major events. I run two major events in New York City about the future of work, and then one last year in Brussels called Reimagine, where we brought together 40 different councils to talk about the future of work.
Well, dig into those events and the councils, and explain what the conference board is too, just for people who may not be initiated. What is the conference board, and what are these events, and what are the councils, and kind of what is the impetus behind them?
Great. The Conference Board is a nonprofit think tank. It is global. It's got a strong base in New York City, where we've got hundreds of councils across the US. We've also got more than 40 councils in Europe and also in Asia. It's got a very strong research side as well as a community side with our councils. And it's also really driving forward a lot of thinking about the future and thinking about the digital economy.
Okay. And so the two councils that you lead, what are they, and how did they come into existence? And then I want to go to your reimagined. But what
Great.
were the councils?
Great. Human Capital Analytics Council is growing very fast. We've got more than 30 members right now of major Fortune 500 companies. One of their top issues, for example, this year is going to be, an AI-enabled workforce and the role of HR. It's a totally critical issue for their survival. My other council used to be called Workforce Planning, but I renamed it to uh, Future Workforce Strategy and Planning. I stole that a little bit from my friend Rupert Bader, who was at Walmart and he's now at NASDAQ. And that group also is really looking very deeply at skills and the role of skills, and particularly AI-enabled skills and where to go. Right now, there's a lot of chaos out there in HR, and we think chaos produces opportunity, as well as risk, as well as a lot of fear. But we're really trying to lean into these AI issues in order to really drive business performance. I
Yeah.
would say both my councils, as well as my executive producing work with Conference Board, it's a lot about outcomes, starting with the outcomes first and then driving forward with measurable analytics.
Well, can I dig into something really quick? Because you kind
Yeah.
of you triggered me in a good way. One of the things that I've been saying is a lot of what's going on historically in people analytics, but also on the workforce planning side, is sort of collapsing into one of this thing that I'm calling AI workforce transformation. Now,
Yes.
again, we can all disagree on words and terms, but it seems conceptually you're seeing the same thing in those councils. Are you seeing that? And what is the kind of you said they're focused on outcomes, right? But what is the catalyst for that, and what outcomes are they trying to influence?
Well, workforce transformation is highly focused on human and executive development. I
Yeah.
think there's a real critical need for really driving new skills in the workplace, not driving new skills for executives and particularly leaders. And I think we're seeing that at the forefront. What does this new skill set look like? What do we need in order to survive and prosper in the future of work?
Yeah. Amy, are you falling in love with the European perspective on these things? Where's your heart at this moment when it comes to this work?
That's a great question. And part of the reason why I wanted to do this Europe project was it did get me outside of I think sometimes a very tunneled mindset in HR in the US. The conference that we ran in Europe, and I was the executive producer with over 600 registrants and 80 speakers. That conference was not just HR. It was the sustainability councils. It was the economy, strategy, and finance councils, along with the human capital management councils. And what we really did is we were looking at a more, I think, cross-functional perspective of how to really solve some of these larger issues of climate change and sustainability of the workforce. You can't solve human capital problems by being in HR alone. You really have to have partners both across the organization as well as across industries. And that was kind of the love of what Europe was about. It was meeting people like Dr. Michael Jacobides, who talks a lot about innovation and entrepreneurship and the role of AI. He's doing some marvelous work in London at the
Yeah,
London
who's
Business
he
School.
affiliated with?
London Business School. He's a
Okay.
professor there, executive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, I'm wondering. So I'm thinking about these issues. Are there differences in perspective than kind of you mentioned there's kind of a myopic HR US centric view, and then there's sort of a European view. What are the similarities and what are the differences more importantly?
Wow, that's a great question. I would say one of the similarities is there's definitely a human focus emerging, that it's
Mhm.
very critical to take care of people first. I also think everyone's aware of the need to lean into technology, to lean into different investments that perhaps have been made in the past. And I think there's just a need to reestablish kind of trust within the workplace. I'm sure you've seen the recent Gallup figures, and trust is not doing too well out there in terms of how teams are operating and how people are trusting or not trusting how corporations are going to use AI. So I think those things are in common. I think what's different about Europe right now is Europe has had a little bit more bad news first. So they're in a shock to say, oh, we haven't really done the infrastructure investment. We haven't really done the AI investment. We really need to start looking at things differently because we are very obviously in decline. And the US, I don't think, has that realization yet.
Yeah, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. It kind of like, is it like a decoder if you try to understand like why are, because I see this sometimes like different organizations that I think would be in similar boats, but they come from like different places. I'm like, why do they have such a different worldview on this? And it's like, oh, it's because your experience is completely different, and maybe the trust isn't there, maybe the infrastructure is not there, whatever. And that is a really good explanation there. I have to confess, I've been a member of the conference board councils in the past. I'm a huge fan, so I'm biased in my perspective on this. But I wanted to ask you, for these councils in particular, what is the value of closed door sessions, and what is the concept of Chatham House rules and those type of things? Why do people gain value from having those type of discussions?
That's a good question, Cole. And I think what I've seen, particularly in the evolution of councils and communities, is we've really gone from presentation to conversation. And the
Hmm.
conversations are really about just in time problem solving as well as longer term problem solving. So the value of a community that's, vendor free, but we do bring in, next practice vendors to talk, is to really get some reality around what's going on and how to solve problems in a just in time basis.
Yeah.
The Chatham House rules allow you to talk about the very deep problems you have. It also allows you to solve problems and share case studies that might not be ready for prime time yet.
Have you ever heard me talk about the conference speaker effect?
No.
Okay. This is one of my, I don't mention it as much as I used to, but this used to be one of my common riffs that I would say, which, and why I think sessions like the conference board are so valuable is I used to have this experience earlier in my career. It still happens, but like it was very formative for me where I would go to a conference, I'd see an amazing speaker from an amazing organization talk about on stage all the amazing work that they were doing. And then I'd run into that person at the metaphorical bar or happy hour later, and they would give me their business card and say, "Oh, everything we're doing here is atrocious. I hate it here. Are you guys hiring?" And I was like, "Whoa!" Like the delta between what you presented on stage and
Yeah.
and the reality is just too wide a chasm. And what happens is if you're in that audience, a lot of organizations are like, "Oh my God, company XYZ is doing such amazing work, and we are so behind. Everything is so terrible where we are, and everything's so amazing there. Gosh, I wonder if we can be like them someday." And you don't realize that like everybody's kind of suffering in silence together. And so I call that the conference speaker effect. But one of the amazing things about these type of councils is they allow for people to kind of let down their guard a little bit. They get a chance to actually share what's going on and not engage in so much of that conference speaker effect. And so talk about like talk about the value of that, and even maybe some of the types of things you've seen unearthed that wouldn't have come up otherwise.
Yeah, and I think it's more about problem solving than promotion.
Yeah.
You're up on stage, you're promoting yourself, you're promoting your brand, you're promoting your career. But I think when you're in these conversations with small groups, and whether it's, 5 or 20, the conversations tend to really focus on, what's real and what I need to do to keep my job and what I need to do to, quite frankly, have a more fulfilling career. And sometimes what happens in these groups is they start to see that next level of where they could be or where they could go, or what their aspirations might be. So I think there are two things happening. One, they're saying, gee, I'm not alone in this mess, but also there's a higher standard or higher level of my career, where my organization could go, that's really inspiring. So I know every time I come away from a meeting, particularly the in-person meetings, and you hosted one at FedEx, that was really a fun meeting, I remember. You
Yeah.
come away just very engaged again with your community of experts, with where you can go, what you personally can achieve. So I think that's part of it.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, you mentioned earlier, Conference Board is a nonprofit, is a research institution. What types of research are you doing? And is it solely focused on HR, or is it on other parts of the business as well?
No, it's actually, we've done a lot of research in sustainability. It used to be the ESG Center. Now it's called Sustainability and Governance. So all of those issues about what does great corporate governance look like, that all becomes part of the research agenda. I think one of their stronger centers as well is the Economy, Strategy, and Finance Center. And that's where you get a lot of the economic indices and CEO updates. So they're running a big event in New York soon on that. And then the third center is Human Capital. Human Capital Center has done a lot of deep dives recently on AI. One of my favorite reports, they were looking at AI and the role of coaching and how AI is going to totally reshape coaching and scaling of executive development across organizations.
Yeah. I wanted to share something with you really quickly, just because since we prepped, you shared it on LinkedIn. I was like, oh, this is interesting. I want to talk to Amy about this. So I guess Brad Boyson, I'm not connected with him, but I think you are. He wrote an
Yeah.
article he called "The Introduction to Human Capital Materiality," and it's part 2 of 5. But he sets the scene talking about this three-way agency conflict that HR functions solve three different roles from a governance perspective: a corporate fiduciary that is bound to the organization's financial and strategic interests, a workforce advocate bound to the protection and development of people, and a public steward bound by societal standards, ethical norms, and legal compliance. And I thought this was such an excellent framing. I've never seen
Yeah.
somebody frame it this way. First of all, like, had you conceptualized it that way before? That you're really an advocate, a fiduciary, and a steward all at the same time, and how that creates kind of inner conflict and sometimes some ambiguities there. But well, give me your perspective on it, because I saw that you had shared about it, and I thought this was so interesting.
Well, first I have to say, Brad Boyson is brilliant. He was the convener of our ISO 30414, which are human capital standards.
Mhm.
I was a US rep. He's Canadian. He was in Dubai for many years, just recently moved back to Canada. And he's really been a leading thinker about the role of human capital standards. And yes, I think while this was totally his own packaging of what our role is, many of the things I think are underlying this are part of what's happening with human capital standards. This new need for a new operating system to really drive forward data-based executive management.
Yeah. So one of the things, like, if you go back to kind of those three principles, that's what really intrigued me. I was like,
Yeah,
this actually clarifies an internal conflict I've had. Is it always seemed to me that where I worked, the HR team prioritized one of the three over the other two, and
advocate.
they never explicitly said that. And so some organizations very business focused, some very advocacy focused, some very are we doing the right things for society, that kind of thing that's going on. I remember I even worked at a company earlier in my career. I won't name them, but they had a model of HR. They called it the HR activist model. And part of that, and so they had gone wholesale in on workforce advocacy. Like that was like it, and nothing else mattered. And I always thought that this was like, no, the point is the tension. The point is the three-legged stool. You've got to
Yeah.
be focused on all three. And so I guess from your experience, Amy, how do you see, like, how do we act how do we not do that? Like, how do we not get into just focusing on one at the expense of the others?
Well, I think the need to focus on all three is something that just has to be front and center. And typically that happens with, clear accountability and acknowledging that you've got these three roles and that you've got stakeholders that you're responsible to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you brought up Brad being involved in the ISO standards. I know you've done a ton of work in this space. Can you talk, like, set the scene really quick? Like, what is ISO and what are the standards that you're working on? And then let's talk about how they impact, people analytics and benchmarking and public reporting and all of that.
Right. I mean, the ISO standards were first introduced, the human capital standards in 2018. 2025 of this year, we released a whole new set. So we had a global team working on these standards. There are 53 different metrics, but they're in 11 different areas. So they cover everything from productivity to human capital, labor issues, all the way across the board. what I usually tell companies to do is, take a look at the standards. You've got to buy them from ISO, which is also produces many, many other standards all the way back from, quality management years ago. But look at the standards and, do a little audit on your own to see where you are. What I think is particularly good about them is that they have very strong technical standards behind them. So there are clear ways to measure things like human capital ROI. And, at the end of the day, what we're really looking for is how do we have comparable standards across organizations so you can present something to your board and say, here we are, and here's how we're doing, and here's where we're going, and here's where we've been. You have a couple of companies like Allianz, for example, who have been certified globally in the standard. Deutsche Bank is another one. And you look at Allianz's financial performance since they first got certified, they've just taken off like a rocket.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's some real kind of baseline outcomes happening with companies that lean in. Interestingly enough, in the US, we don't have a lot of companies as interested, but globally, we've seen a lot of movement in Europe and a lot in Asia.
But why do you think that is?
Well, some of it is the regulatory environment in the US. There's sort of a pushback right now against all things sort of regulation. And part of it is that you've got maybe smaller markets in Asia, and those markets are embracing it from, a top-down standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I think you've done some work independent of the conference board in terms of human capital impact. Can you talk about like how that relates to this?
Yeah, a couple of years ago with Jeff Higgins, we started something called the Human Capital Investment and Reporting Council. Ran that for 5 years, had a lot of success with it just in terms of bringing together members. But that has really merged more recently into something called Human Capital Impact. It's a group that meets about every 2 weeks or so, and it's really just a conversation about pushing standards forward, about really driving this operating system for a new way of thinking about data and analytics.
How will you know if it's been successful? All right, if because I mean I've attended a few of those over the years. I've been graciously invited to, and it's always really great. You'll bring in like investors, and they'll talk about how human capital is a differentiator for how their investment profile and things like that. It's fascinating work. But how will you know that it's making the impact that you hope it's having?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it has to do with execution. When people adopt standards, or when we're seeing people just have a conversation about metrics and benchmarks and comparability and performance.
Yeah.
I also tend to put more of I think, a financial lens on human capital, bringing together kind of finance, HR, and investment strategy. So that's kind of where I see the success going, when we're having really impact in the market, when you're seeing stock price move, when you're seeing, real financial performance move.
Well, that's going back to the three-legged stool. That's the
Yeah,
fiduciary
the
part of it.
stool.
I mean, that's what I think that one of the things I've been doing is some self-reflection lately about like, why do I like talking to certain people but not other people? Like, what is it? Because like I'll just meet somebody, I'm like, like I just like you, and like, why is that? And I've always like, even before I even knew you, Amy, because I had seen you lead some of the conferences that I attended in the past. I was like, oh, I get her. She's great, and I think it's because you have a more well-rounded view. You don't, again, myopically look at things as like, oh, this is the one and true way, and there are no other ways. Because like I bring people on the podcast often where they'll talk about things that either I find boring or I disagree with, but I think it's good to educate the community on, because we need to have a well-rounded community that focuses on things from a variety of different perspectives. And like I wanted to give you credit here. I think people do not realize how difficult it is to plan an event, to execute an event, but especially to have a good conversation while running like a panel or being kind of the keynote and introducing folks. That's actually really, really difficult. And you do it effortlessly. So I wanted to compliment you there. But are there any like tips and tricks you have for like how to run a good event, or how to do that effectively?
Well, I think part of it is what I call ABL, always be learning,
Okay.
and always be listening would probably be a
Yeah.
side to that you've always got to be open to adapt to the ideas that are coming in from your executives. Part of the reason why I really love Conference Board is that It is. It's an ABL organization. It's always having conversations. It's always producing research. It's always producing events and conferences. And those conferences in particular are a way to meet people and bring them together in sometimes different and odd combinations that produce innovation and oftentimes entrepreneurship.
So what are some of the events you have coming up? I know you said you had something in April and then maybe some larger conferences coming up later in the year. What do you have coming up?
Yeah, there's a transformation conference coming up in New York and Brooklyn in May, I believe.
Okay.
There's another one coming up in October that will also be looking at Talent 2030. I'm not running those events. I'm probably going to be running another one in Brussels next year, which is also on the future of work. It's going to be more HR focused or human capital management focused this year, but we're already looking at, sort of the kinds of innovation that can occur when you bring outside of HR speakers in to talk to human capital executives.
Now, were you always in HR or where did you start out your career?
No, actually, I've had, three stages of my career. The first stage was really as an environmental journalist and publisher in Washington. I was known as the Water Lady because I wrote about water information news service, alias WINS. I sold that business and then went back to business school up at Yale and got a degree in finance. So again, not HR, although I
Yeah.
was very interested also in organizational behavior, met my husband, so that was good too. Although
Yeah.
he lived right down the street from me in Washington and I never knew him. So there you go. Then second stage of my career was really very much in HR consulting. I was internal for a little while at JP Morgan, but quickly moved outside to be an external consultant, worked with Dr. Robert Daniels, who is a hardcore behavioral consultant, probably one of my top mentors of my life. And then the third stage of my career really has been in, this community organizing of councils and producing events where we are also bringing together communities for conversations.
Yeah. Well, where's AI going? Where do you see it
Oh
going in
God.
terms of its impact? I mean, again, you get to see kind of firsthand behind the scenes. What's happening and where's it going?
Well, I think the first place it's going is with the individual developing stronger skills. And I think Josh Bersin and others have said this, it's the super worker. It's being able to really drive skills personally. So I know that at least two of my members they're doing a lot of AI coaching and counseling within their organizations. They're the super users, the ones that have the $100 subscriptions a month. And I think that super user is sort of the first place HR needs to go. They need to learn the skills themselves so then they can begin to share the skills and push the skills out in the organization. I think we are looking at this whole skills-based area. It's very complicated, as you know. My group in particular, my workforce planning group, they've been skills skeptics. And I know you have as well, because there's been a lot of push about product and skills. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty complex topic and companies are moving into it slowly, but they're beginning to drive it from an outside in perspective versus building out the skills taxonomies internally. So I think that's another issue that's, we're seeing where is AI going? It's definitely going into the AI skills space. It's going to revolutionize workforce planning and it's probably going to change things up a lot in HR.
Yeah. I hate these arguments when they get framed kind of like a caveman, like skills good, skills bad. I always think that, like, I always look at things like 2x2 charts as like, is it skills related or non-skills related? And is it data focused or non-data focused? The trouble is much of the skills related stuff is non-data focused. And so I'm like, oh, that's stupid. But there's actually really great work out there that is in the skill space that is data central and data native. And so I
Yeah.
think it's about being able to delineate those things. And so, I have complex views on them because we've had guests on the podcast in the past who are like skills is, a fad. And then other guests are like skills is central to everything I do. And I'm like, both of you are right. And so it's just, it's funny to kind of see those things play out in the real world. But
Well, I know Lightcast has done some interesting things. You were talking a little bit about that, how they fit in this whole skills arena.
well, like, I mean, again, my bias on this is if you think that data is central to doing skills effectively, well, wouldn't you want to be affiliated with the company that has the best data in this space? And so that's why I think about things. I try not to promote Lightcast too much on here, but that is a part kind of my day job. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just really important that I don't know. I don't even know why this is controversial, but like why data should be central to everything that HR is doing, right? And again, it's 2026 now. I don't know why that would be controversial in any organization, but a lot of times it is because people just like doing what they like doing and they like doing what they're used to, and it's just not always data based in evidence, based in data. And I've complained before on here that like I'm just kind of over that. I'm over that mentality, and I'd like to move past it. And so I've already kind of like emotionally moved past it, and I just want
Yeah.
other people to join me on that journey.
Well, likewise, I mean, I have Max Bloomberg coming in to talk with my human capital analytics group next week, and he sort of made an interesting point in our conversation. Again, a person I love talking to because
Yeah,
his brain is so wonderful.
he's been a
Um,
guest on the podcast before. Yeah,
yeah, I know he has, but he basically said, we can get stuck in this database management. We get stuck in our data when we have to sometimes step out and understand the outcomes we're driving for. And I think that's also where, HR and AI needs to go right now.
I could
Like,
not
don't get
agree
too
more.
stuck in the AI tech, but stay
Yeah.
focused on the outcomes you're trying to achieve with the AI.
Well, again, I think it's all about balance, right? We talked about the three-legged stool earlier. It's like invest in AI, but don't become a tinkerer. Care about the business, but don't become a finance person.
Yeah.
Care about your employees, but don't become an activist. Like it's like all of these things in moderation are probably helpful. But with that said, do you want to join me in Cole's Corner, Amy?
Sure.
All right. Welcome to Cole's Corner. Let's start out with some rapid fire. The first
Uh-oh.
question I have for you is if you had stayed in journalism, what would you be writing about right now?
Well, I'm kind of going back into journalism right now because I am trying to do a lot more writing. But I would definitely be writing about the future of work. I would be writing about these four issues I've been talking about, which is, the role of technology, transparency, trust, and teams, and how that's coming together to drive a new future. So I'm trying to get back into my writing stage. That's one of my plans for 2026.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's very convenient too. You'd be doing what you'd be doing anyway. Um, so, what's the place you've never been to that you most like to go and why?
Oh, wow. I I would have to say Portugal right now. I just was recently in southern Spain, so I'm very much enamored of that part of the world. And I'm also going to go to Stockholm in February. So that's
Oh,
also going to be a new trip.
in February.
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't the month I was expecting to go to Stockholm. Okay.
Well, my husband has a trip there, and I've got some conference board friends I want to see. So
Well, bring your snowshoes or something. Yeah. That'd
no
be great.
need for sunglasses, I hear.
Yeah, yeah. If you were a character in any book, TV show, or movie, who would you be and why?
Wow.
Think about it. You got all the time.
I have to say, it would probably be somebody who's an explorer of some sort, someone who likes to always push new territory. I would say Amelia Earhart because my real name is Amelia, but she didn't end up too well
Well, let's say the early years. Amelia Earhart in the early years.
in the early years. She was rather exciting.
All right. Well, I've got one big question for you. So you have the privileged position if you get to be behind more closed door discussions on people analytics and workforce planning at leading companies than almost anyone else. What do you know about what's really going on in the field that others aren't aware of?
Well, I think that there's a lot of skepticism about skills and where they're going,
Yeah.
that people are questioning a lot of the vendors out there.
Hmm.
They're questioning whether it's really skills we're after or learning.
Yeah.
And how do we really enhance the learning profiles of companies? How do we really enhance the learning capabilities of people without getting so stuck on particular skills? And learning is an internal process, whereas skills are a little more external. It's really about that ability, willingness to learn and adapt to new situations. So I think that's kind of one of the things I'm seeing. It's not really about skills, it's really about learning and development.
That makes a lot of sense. Um And it's good that those kind of discussions are going on. I think, again, kind of to hit the point from earlier that we didn't really talk about is, conference board, they're not there to promote any particular solutions. You're promoting the conversations. And so
Yeah.
you get to actually have those discussions about vendors behind closed doors and say, hey, we really like this vendor. We really struggle with this vendor, and getting to have those authentic discussions, I think, is really helpful for a lot of people. Kind of cuts through all the marketing.
Yeah, and they're all investing, millions and millions of dollars in vendors, and they want to be able to cut to the chase. They want to be able to move to execution faster, to get to the outcomes faster. So sometimes the conversations are about, how do I really execute with this vendor? How do I really move to, you know, better partnerships with the vendor?
Yep,
And
absolutely.
and what's behind the box? Is it a black box, and what's really in the box, and what works and what doesn't work?
What's in the box? It's empty. It's an empty box. That's funny.
Hey, I'm Katie Van Horn. And I'm Jackie Clayton. We're your hosts of the Inclusive AF podcast, where we take on DEI, leadership, and HR without all the corporate fluff. That's right. We've got decades of experience, a lot of opinions, and zero tolerance for performative anything. Every week, we dig into what it really takes to build inclusive workplaces with honesty, strategy, and a few side eyes. We'll talk about the tough stuff, power dynamics, privilege, what's broken in the system, and how we can all do better. And don't worry, it's not all heavy. We bring receipts, laughs, and real talk from people actually doing the work. Think of it as your weekly dose of truth, tips, and a little tea to help you lead with intention and show up for your people. So if you're ready to push past the buzzwords and get into the actual work of inclusion, you're in the right place. So subscribe to the Inclusive AF podcast. New episodes drop every week. Catch us on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be here breaking it down one inclusive convo at a time.
Well, let's do some what am I reading really quick. So the first post I saw recently from a gentleman named Ruben Rusk is talking about positive psychology interventions. And so they had done a study to show that across all different kinds of populations, so the general population, mentally ill, physically ill, and different outcomes, well-being, anxiety, stress, and depression, that the effects of positive psychology in terms of the intervention that you do, regardless of the type of intervention, that they have really positive effects out of the gate, but that there's diminishing effects over time. And so in kind of the psychology community, positive psychology has really come into to maturity over like the last 20 or 30 years, is saying like kind of a universal good that. But one of the things that really hadn't taken into consideration until this research is this concept of hedonic adaptation. And so it's the reason that effects tend to fade over time is that people simply stop practicing them, or life gets busy, or there's competing demands that crowd out the good intentions there. And that it's not really a failure of the positive psychology interventions, but it's human nature itself. And so that if you're wanting to kind of do these type of interventions and sustain the positive impacts, you have to bring variety and continuity to what's going
Mhm.
on, so that that kind of hedonic treadmill doesn't really kick in here. But what did you think about this one, Amy? And do you have any thoughts about positive psychology interventions?
Well, I'll go back a little bit to my applied behavior analysis days with Dr. Daniels. And
Mhm.
what he would really say is that, if this positive psychology is introduced as an antecedent and it doesn't really change the consequences or the reinforcers of the work environment, of course it's going to fail. You've got to really look at the consequences that drive decisions. And these aren't just, pay and rewards. It's the day-to-day, what's happening in teams. Have you trained your managers, for example, to really provide reinforcement for new behaviors? Or are you really just shouting, oh, we're going to be positive today? We're going to have high
Yeah.
energy today? Or are you really going to do things that really change the positive reinforcement ratios in the workplace?
That's actually like a really good segue into the next one that we have to talk about, which is from a post from John Whitfield, who talks about some research on behavioral performance. So he'd done, I believe it was a meta analysis, and he was talking about high performance is not an individual trait. It is a system-based outcome. And so I think that was getting into just what you were saying there, Amy. And so when capable, well-trained people underperform, our instinct is to look at their values, their mindset, their resilience, their accountability. But actually, the evidence points to elsewhere. And so high performance depends on interacting readiness states from cognitive load and attentional bandwidth, emotional regulation, their physiological state, their motivational state, and the social and environmental signals and goals that are going on. And so, like even, when those states are degraded or are influenced in a negative way, you can see things like, training alone doesn't guarantee performance, or high standards alone doesn't prevent failure, or the giving more effort, even if it's the wrong intervention, doesn't help. And so even, and so that they say performance is more emergent. It arises between the interaction between the person and the system around them. And so what thoughts did you have about this one?
Well, I think that gets us back to why teams are so critical to driving high performance, because it's not just the individual. I remember a fellow I worked with a few years ago. He said, my boss got a trip to Hawaii. I got the postcard from Hawaii, but we're on the same team. So, there you had it in a nutshell, that it really is about the team that really needs to drive performance, and leaders that are setting sometimes the standards for the teams. But yeah, it is really about the energy that's in a team moving forward or moving backward. And, we've all been on high performing teams. We've all been on dysfunctional teams, and we don't think we've changed that much, but we know the context can really drive high performance and inspiration and aspiration.
Well, it's that time of year. It's performance management season, and so we have performance management systems that reward individual high performance. They don't reward teams. They don't reward systems. And so I always find it funny that those two things are in conflict. And recently on the podcast, we've talked a little bit about as well in recent years, the concept of star performers in performance not being normally distributed, it being according to a power law, and how a few star performers can account for, a substantial amount of the productivity of an entire organization. And I see it in contrast to this, where maybe organizations should be focusing, even if they have star performers, like let's say you have a team of 10 people and really one person on that team is just a rock star. But do those other 9 people know? Are they all trying to be their own rock stars? Are they doing things in support of a system that supports that rock star, performing at crazy high levels? And so when I see, a crazy high performing team with a rock star on it, I always think like, do you guys know how beautiful this is and how you've caught lightning in a bottle? Because it really does require some people to take a lead, some people to be in supporting roles, or at least creating a system where everybody's supporting everybody to get that whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. I don't know. Does that jive with kind of the things that you've researched in the past, Amy?
Very much so. And I think if you think of a distribution curve, you're always going to have performance at either end.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you also want to move the distribution curve, right? You want to be able to move it so that that's really the highest level of performance, if you can move everyone up in the team. And that's a matter of the behaviors within the team.
Absolutely. So the last thing I have to talk to you about today, not new at all, but it's something I don't feel like it gets enough publicity. And so I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but this is an article. It was kind of a seminal article in economics from the American Economic Review in 1994 called "Beauty and the Labor Market." And I think some of the phraseology here probably has not aged well, but the authors examine the impact of looks on looks, like attractiveness, on earnings using interviewer ratings and respondents' physical appearance. Plain people earn less money than average-looking people, who earn less money than good-looking people. And the plainness penalty is up to 5 to 10% of average earnings, which is slightly larger than the beauty premium. And this finding tends to be similar among male and female. So there's no kind of gender kind of component to this as well. But it's interesting to me. Like I bring this up every so often because we talk about is, are there different biases that go into different, decisions, whether it's hiring decisions and what have you. And my perspective on this is the attractiveness bias is far and above beyond any other bias that exists. And why it gets no publicity, I do not understand. This is a well-known finding. It's a huge finding. And it is showing, like, if you were thinking about things from like a pay equity standpoint, one of the biggest indicators that they're showing here is that, like, people are not paid equitably if they're less attractive. And that to me is like a huge penalty that no one's talking about. And why we're not talking about this, I do not know. But it also aligns to what we were saying earlier about performance not being an individual trait, and how there's sort of a halo effect that people that are more attractive are given higher performance ratings. Right. And so I do you have any thoughts on this one? This is kind of my soapbox I stand on every so often, but I just do not understand why this does not get more publicity in the world. Like, because if performance is objective, if pay is objective, these kind of things should never be happening.
Well, yeah, they shouldn't be happening, but maybe I think that there are other biases we need to pay attention to that, are more important right now. So the kind of bias that is built into AI, we've had some major lawsuits around that. So I think perhaps the technology-driven biases are the ones that are getting attention rightly right now.
Well, interestingly enough, what are a lot of people doing using AI is to brush up their pictures to make them more attractive.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's like people like are either consciously or unconsciously aware that, even in a world of AI, that, hey, looks, whether they're not they should matter, do matter more than they probably should. So,
certainly an ageism bias is one that, is pretty critical, related to, the looks bias. And
exactly,
I think maybe you're seeing that's the communication that's being focused on, the ageism bias versus the looks bias, but it's kind of the same thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the gift that keeps on giving in a bad way, So I think I'm glad I got a chance to talk to you about this. But I think in terms of things you're reading, I think you mentioned you had picked up my book recently. You have any thoughts, any feedback for me?
I love it. And you can see I've got it sort of bookmarked here with a couple of different things. In particular, you said something that I've quoted quite a bit that really has to do that, we must, I'm going to read it here. We must have a fundamental shift. We must quantify everything we do. It's no longer optional, and it's really key to our survival. So I think that whole idea of quantification and outcomes is something that really is front and center, and I've recommended the book to many people. So thank you for doing it. And man, it must have been a lot of work.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I think it brings back the point from earlier about being the fiduciary, in addition to being the advocate, in addition to being kind of the public servant as well. So, Amy, it's been fantastic having you on as a guest today. Anywhere people can find you or learn more about Conference Board or any other things that you're involved in?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So please connect on LinkedIn, and happy to share any more information about any of the topics we've covered today, Conference Board research, our events, our councils in particular, as well as just kind of the things that are going with ISO and human capital standards.
Absolutely. Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and I'm joined today by Amy Armitage. Thanks for joining me, Amy.
Thanks, Cole.